Section 2 of 3 SF short stories by Paul W. Fairman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Deadly City, Part 2. The sun was lowering in the west now, and when Mina reappeared it seemed that she materialized from the shadows, so quietly did she move. Jim Wilson opened another bottle and put it before her. "Here, have a drink, baby." Obediently, she tilted the bottle and drank. "What do you plan to do?" Frank asked. "It'll be dark soon," Wilson said. "We ought to go out and try to scrounge some flashlights. I bet the power plants are dead. Probably aren't any flashlights either." "Are you going to stay here?" Nora asked. "Here in the loop?" He seemed surprised. "Why not? A man'd be a fool to walk out on all this. All he wants to eat and drink. No goddamn cops around. The life of Riley and why I should walk out. Aren't you afraid of what's going to happen?" "I don't give a good goddamn what's going to happen. What the hell? Something's always going to happen." "They didn't evacuate the city for nothing," Frank said. "You mean we can all get killed?" Jim Wilson laughed. "Sure we can. We could have got killed last week too. We could have got batted in the can by a truck any time we crossed the street." He emptied his bottle, threw it accurately at a mirror over the cash register. The crash was thunderous. "Trouble with you people, you're worrywarts," he said with an expansive grin. "Let's go get some flashlights so we can find our way to bed in one of those fancy hotels." He got to his feet and Mina arose also, a little tired, a little apprehensive, but entirely submissive. Jim Wilson said, "Come on, baby. I sure won't want to lose you." He grinned at the others. "You guys coming?" Frank's eyes met Nora's. He shrugged. "Why not?" he said. "Unless you want to start walking." "I'm too tired," Nora said. As they stepped out through the smashed window, both Nora and Frank half expected to see other forms moving up and down Madison Street. But there was no one. Only the unreal desolation of the lonely pavement and the dark windowed buildings. "The biggest ghost town on earth," Frank muttered. Nora's hand slipped into Frank's. He squeezed it and neither of them seemed conscious of the contact. "I wonder," Nora said, "maybe this is only one of them. Maybe all the other big cities are evacuated too." Jim Wilson and Mina were walking ahead. He turned. "If you two can't sleep without finding out what's up, it's plenty easy to do." "You think we could find a battery radio in some store?" Frank asked. "Hell no, they'll all be gone. But all you have to do is snoop around in some newspaper office. If you can read, you can find out what happened." It seemed strange to Frank that he had not thought of this. Then he realized he hadn't tried very hard to think of anything at all. He was surprised also at his lack of fear. He's gone through life pretty much taking things as they came, as big a sucker as the next man, making more than his quota of mistakes and blunders. Finding himself completely alone in a deserted city for the first time in his life, he had naturally fallen prey to sudden fright. But that had gradually passed, and now he was able to accept the new reality fairly passively. He wondered if that wasn't pretty much the way of all people. New situations brought a surge of whatever emotion fitted the picture. Then the emotion subsided, and the new thing became the ordinary. This, he decided, was the manner in which humanity survived. Humanity took things as they came. Pile on enough of anything and it becomes the ordinary. Jim Wilson had picked up a garbage box and hurled it through the window of an electric shop. The glass came down with a crash that shuddered up the empty, darkening street and grumbled off into silence. Jim Wilson went inside. "I'll see what I can find. You stay out here and watch for cops." His laughter echoed out as he disappeared. Mina stood waiting silently, unmoving, and somehow she reminded Frank of a dumb animal, an unreasoning creature with no mind of her own, waiting for a signal from her master. Strangely, he resented this, but at the same time could find no reason for his resentment, except the feeling that no one should appear as much a slave as Mina. Jim Wilson reappeared in the window. He motioned to Mina. "Come on in, baby. You and me's got to have a little conference." His exaggerated wink was barely perceptible in the gloom as Mina stepped over the sill into the store. "Won't be long, folks," Wilson said in high good humor, and the two of them vanished into the darkness beyond. Frank Brooks glanced at Nora, but her face was turned away. He cursed softly under his breath. He said, "Wait a minute," and went into the store through the huge, jagged opening. Inside, he could barely make out the counters. The place was larger than it had appeared from the outside. Wilson and Mina were nowhere about. Frank found the counter he was looking for and pawed out several flashlights. They were only empty tubes, but he found a case of batteries in a panel compartment against the wall. "Who's there?" "Me. I came in for some flashlights. Couldn't you wait? It's getting dark." "You don't have to be so damn impatient." Jim Wilson's voice was hostile and surly. Frank stifled his quick anger. "We'll be outside," he said. He found Nora waiting where he'd left her. He loaded batteries into 4 flashlights before Jim Wilson and Mina reappeared. Wilson's good humor was back. "How about the Morrison or Sherman?" he said. "Or do you want to get real ritzy and walk up to the Drake?" "My feet hurt," Mina said. The woman spoke so rarely, Frank Brooks was startled by her words. "Morrison's the closest," Jim Wilson said. "Let's go." He took Mina by the arm and swung off up the street. Frank and Nora fell in behind. Nora shivered. Frank, holding her arm, asked, "Cold?" "No, it's just all unreal again." "I see what you mean." "I never expected to see the loop dark. I can't get used to it." A vagrant, whispering wind picked up a scrap of paper and whirled it along the street. It caught against Nora's ankle. She jerked perceptibly and kicked the scrap away. The wind caught it again and spiraled it away into the darkness. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell away." "I told you before that I slept through the evacuation or whatever it was. That wasn't exactly true. I did sleep through it, but it was my fault. I put myself to sleep." "I don't get it." "I tried to kill myself. Sleeping tablets. 7 of them, but they weren't enough." Frank said nothing while they paced off 10 steps through the dark canyon that was Madison Street. Nora wondered if he had heard. "I tried to commit suicide." "Why?" "I was tired of life, I guess." "What do you want? Sympathy?" The sudden harshness in his voice brought her eyes around, but his face was a white blur. No, I don't think so." "Well, you won't get it from me. Suicide is silly. You can have troubles and all that. Everybody has them. But suicide? Why did you try it?" A high, thin whine, a wordless vibration of eloquence, needled out of the darkness into their ears. The shock was like a sudden shower of ice water dashed over their bodies. Nora's fingers dug into Frank's arm, but he did not feel the cutting nails. There's someone out there in the street." 25 feet ahead of where Frank and Nora stood frozen, there burst the booming voice of Jim Wilson. "What the hell was that?" And the shock was dispelled. The white circle from Wilson's flash bit out across the blackness to outline movement on the far side of the street. Then Frank Brooks' light, and Nora's, went exploring. "There's somebody over there," Wilson bellowed. "Hey, you! Show your face! Quit sneaking around!" Frank's light swept an arc that clearly outlined the buildings across the street, and then weakened as it swung westward. There was something or someone back there, but obscured by the dimness. He was swept by a sense of unreality again. "Did you see them?" Nora's light beam had dropped to her feet as though she feared to point it out into the darkness. "I thought I saw something." Jim Wilson was swearing industriously. "There was a guy over there. He ducked around the corner. Some damn fool out scrounging. Wish I had a gun." Frank and Nora moved ahead and the four stood in a group. "Put out your lights," Wilson said. "They make good targets if the jerk's got any weapons." They stood in the darkness, Nora holding tightly to Frank's arm. Frank said, "That was the damnedest noise I ever heard." "Like a siren?" Frank thought Jim Wilson spoke hopefully, as though wanting somebody to agree with him. "Not like anything I've ever heard. Not like a whistle either. More of a moan. Let's get to that goddamn hotel and—" Jim Wilson's words were cut off by a new welling up of the melancholy howling. It had a new pattern this time. It sounded from many places, not nearer, Frank thought, than Lake Street on the north, but spreading outward and backward and growing fainter until it died on the wind. Nora was shivering, clinging to Frank without reserve. Jim Wilson said, "I'll be damned if it doesn't sound like a signal of some kind." "Maybe it's a language, a way of communication." "But who the hell's communicating?" "How would I know?" "We best get to that hotel and bar a few doors. A man can't fight in the dark, and nothing to fight with." They hurried up the street, but it was all different now. Gone was the illusion of being alone. Gone the sense of solitude. Around them the ghost town had come suddenly alive. Sinister forces more frightening than the previous solitude had now to be reckoned with. "Something happened. Something in the last few minutes," Nora whispered. Frank leaned close as they crossed the street to the dark, silent pile that was the Morrison Hotel. "I think I know what you mean." "It was as though there was no one around, and then suddenly they came." "I think they came and went away again." "Did you actually see anyone when you flashed your light?" "No, I can't say positively that I did. But I got the impression there were figures out there, at least a dozen of them, and that they moved back away from the light, always just on the edge of it." "I'm scared, Frank." "So am I." "Do you think it could all be imagination?" "Those moans, maybe the first one. I've heard of people imagining sounds, but not the last ones. And besides, we all heard them." Jim Wilson, utterly oblivious of any subtle emanations in the air, boomed out in satisfaction. "We don't have to bust the joint open. The revolving door works." "Then maybe we ought to be careful," Frank said. "Maybe somebody else is around here." "Could be. We'll find out." "Why are we afraid?" Nora whispered. "It's natural, isn't it?" Frank melded the beam of his light with that of Jim Wilson. The white finger pierced the darkness inside. Nothing moved. "I don't see why it should be. If there are people in there, they must be as scared as we are." Nora was very close to him as they entered. The lobby seemed deserted. The flashlight beam scanned the empty chairs and couches. The glass of the deserted cages threw back reflections. "The keys are in there," Frank said. He vaulted the desk and scanned the numbers under the pigeonholes. "We better stay down low," Jim Wilson said. "Damned if I'm going to climb to the penthouse. How about the 4th floor?" "That's plenty high enough." Frank came out with a handful of keys. "Odd numbers," he said. 4 in a row." "Well, I'll be damned," Jim Wilson muttered. But he said no more, and they climbed the stairs in silence. They passed the quiet dining rooms and banquet halls, and by the time they reached the 4th floor, the doors giving off the corridors had assumed a uniformity. "Here they are." He handed a key to Wilson. "That's the end one." He said nothing as he gave Mina her key, but Wilson grunted, "For Christ's sake," in a disgusted voice, took Mina's key and threw it on the floor. Frank and Nora watched as Wilson unlocked his door. Wilson turned. "Well, good night, all. If you get goosed by any spooks, just yell." Mina followed him without a word, and the door closed. Frank handed Nora her key. "Lock your door and you'll be safe. I'll check the room first." He unlocked the door and flashed his light inside. Nora was close behind him as he entered. He checked the bathroom. "Everything's clear. Lock your door and you'll be safe."
"Frank?"
"Yes?"
"I'm afraid to stay alone."
"You mean you want me to?"
"There are 2 beds here."
His reply was slow in coming. Nora didn't wait for it. Her voice rose to the edge of hysteria.
"Quit being so damn righteous. Things have changed. Can't you realize that? What does it matter how or where we sleep? Does the world care? Will it make a damn bit of difference to the world whether I strip stark naked in front of you?"
A sob choked in her throat.
"Or would that outrage your morality?"
He moved toward her, stopped 6 inches away. "It isn't that. For God's sake, I'm no saint. It's just that I thought that you—"
"I'm plain scared. I don't want to be alone. To me, that's all that's important."
Her face was against his chest and his arms went around her, but her own hands were fists held together against him until he could feel her knuckles, hard against his chest. She was crying. "Sure," Frank said. "I'll stay with you. Now take it easy. Everything's going to be all right." Nora sniffled without bothering to reach for her handkerchief.
"Stop lying. You know it isn't going to be all right."
Frank was at somewhat of a loss. This flare-up of Nora's was entirely unexpected. He eased toward the place the flashlight had shown the bed to be. Her legs hit its edge and she sat down. You want me to sleep in the other one?" he asked.
"Of course," Nora replied with marked bitterness. "I'm afraid you wouldn't be very comfortable in with me."
There was a time of silence. Frank took off his jacket, shirt, and trousers. It was funny, he thought. He'd spent his money, been drugged, beaten and robbed as a result of one objective: to get into a room alone with a girl. And a girl not nearly as nice as Nora at that. Now, here he was alone with a real dream, and he was tongue-tied. It didn't make sense. He shrugged. Life was crazy sometimes. He heard the rustle of garments and wondered how much Nora was taking off. Then he dropped his trousers, forgotten, to the floor. "Did you hear that?"
"Yes, it's that—"
Frank went to the window, raised the sash. The moaning sound came in louder, but it was from far distance. "I think that's out around Evanston." Frank felt a warmth on his cheek, and he realized Nora was by his side, leaning forward. He put an arm around her, and they stood unmoving in complete silence. Although their ears were straining for the sound coming from the north, Frank could not be oblivious to the warm flesh under his hand. Nora's breathing was soft against his cheek. She said,
"Listen to how it rises and falls. It's almost as though they were using it to talk with. The inflection changes."
"I think that's what it is. It's coming from a lot of different places. It stops in some places and starts in others."
"It's so weird."
"Spooky," Frank said, "but in a way it makes me feel better."
"I don't see how it could."
Nora pressed closer to him. "It does, though, because of what I was afraid of. I had it figured out that the city was going to blow up. That a bomb had been planted that they couldn't find, or something like that. Now, I'm pretty sure it's something else. I'm willing to bet we'll be alive in the morning."
Nora thought that over in silence. "If that's the way it is, if some kind of invaders are coming down from the north, isn't it stupid to stay here? Even if we are tired, we ought to be trying to get away from them."
"I was thinking the same thing. I'll go and talk to Wilson." They crossed the room together, and he left her by the bed and went on to the door. Then he remembered he was in his shorts and went back and got his trousers. After he'd put them on, he wondered why he'd bothered. He opened the door. Something warned him, some instinct, or possibly his natural fear and caution coincided with the presence of danger. He heard the footsteps on the carpeting down the hall. Soft but unmistakably footsteps. He called, "Wilson, Wilson, that you?" The creature outside threw caution to the winds. Frank sensed rather than heard a body hurtling toward the door. A shrill, mad laughter raked his ears, and the weight of a body hit the door. Frank drew strength from pure panic as he threw his weight against the panel, but perhaps an inch or two from the latch the door wavered from opposing strength. Through the narrow opening he could feel the hoarse breath of exertion in his face. Insane giggles and curses sounded through the black stillness. Frank had the wild conviction he was losing the battle, and added strength came from somewhere. He heaved and there was a scream, and he knew he had at least one finger caught between the door and the jamb. He threw his weight against the door with frenzied effort, and heard the squash of the finger. The voice kited up to a shriek of agony, like that of a wounded animal. Even with his life at stake, and the life of Nora, Frank could not deliberately slice the man's fingers off. Even as he fought the urge, he called himself a fool. He allowed the door to give slightly inward. The hand was jerked to safety. At that moment another door opened close by, and Jim Wilson's voice boomed, "What the hell is going on out here?" Simultaneous with this, racing footsteps receded down the hall, and from the well of the stairway came a whining cry of pain. "Jumping G's," Wilson bellowed. "We got company. We ain't alone." "He tried to get into my room." "You shouldn't have opened the door. Nora okay?" "Yeah, she's all right." "Tell her to stay in her room, and you do the same. We'd be crazy to go after that coot in the dark. He'll keep till morning." Frank closed the door, double-locked it, and went back to Nora's bed. He could hear a soft sobbing. He reached down and pulled back the covers, and the sobbing came louder. Then he was down on the bed, and she was in his arms. She cried until the panic subsided, while he held her and said nothing. After a while she got control of herself. "Don't leave me, Frank," she begged. "Please don't leave me." He stroked her shoulder. "I won't," he whispered. They lay for a long time in utter silence, each seeking strength in the other's closeness. The silence was finally broken by Nora. "Frank?" "Yes?" "Do you want me?" He did not answer. "If you want me, you can have me, Frank." Frank said nothing. "I told you today that I tried to commit suicide. Remember?" "I remember." "That was the truth. I did it because I was tired of everything. Because I've made a terrible mess of things. I didn't want to go on living." He remained silent, holding her. As she spoke again, her voice sharpened. "Can't you understand what I'm telling you? I'm no good. I'm just a bum. Other men have had me. Why shouldn't you? Why should you be cheated out of what other men have had?" He remained silent. After a few moments, Nora said, "For God's sake, talk. Say something." "How do you feel about it now? Will you try to kill yourself the next chance you get?" No, I don't think I'll ever try it again." "Then things must look better." "I don't know anything about that. I just don't want to do it now." She did not urge him this time, and he was slow in speaking. "It's kind of funny, it really is. Don't get the idea I've got morals. I haven't. I've had my share of women. I was working on one the night they slipped me the Mickey, the night before I woke up to this tomb of a city. But now, tonight, it's different. I feel like I want to protect you. Is that strange?" "No," she said quietly. "I guess not." They lay there silently, their thoughts going off into the blackness of the sepulchral night. After a long while, Nora's even breathing told him she was asleep. He got up quietly, covered her, and went to the other bed. But before he slept, the weird wailings from out of Evanston Way came again, rose and fell in that strange conversational cadence, then died away into nothing. Frank awoke to the first fingers of daylight. Nora still slept. He dressed and stood for some moments with his hand on the doorknob. Then he threw the bolt and cautiously opened the door. The hallway was deserted. At this point it came to him forcibly that he was not a brave man. All his life, he realized, he had avoided physical danger and had refused to recognize the true reason for so doing. He had classified himself as a man who dodged trouble through good sense, that the truly civilized person went out of his way to keep the peace. He realized now that that attitude was merely salve for his ego. He faced the empty corridor and did not wish to proceed further. But stripped of the lifelong alibi, he forced himself to walk through the doorway, closed the door softly, and moved toward the stairs. He paused in front of the door behind which Jim Wilson and Mina were no doubt sleeping. He stared at it wistfully. It certainly would not be a mark of cowardice to get Jim Wilson up under circumstances such as these. In fact, he would be a fool not to do so. Stubbornness forbade such a move, however. He walked softly toward the place where the hallway dead ended and became a cross corridor. He made the turn carefully, pressing against one wall. There was no one in sight. He got to the stairway and started down. His muscles and nerves tightened with each step. When he reached the lobby, he was ready to jump sky high at the drop of a pin. But no one dropped any pins, and he reached the modernistic glass doorway to the drugstore with only silent screaming in his ears. The door was unlocked. One hinge squeaked slightly as he pushed the door inward. It was in the drugstore that Frank found signs of the fourth-floor intruder. An inside counter near the prescription department was red with blood. Bandages and first aid supplies had been unboxed and thrown around with abandon. Here the man had no doubt administered to his smashed hand. But where had he gone? Asleep, probably, in one of the rooms upstairs. Frank wished fervently for a weapon. Beyond doubt there was not a gun left in the loop. A gun was not the only weapon ever created, though, and Frank searched the store and found a line of pocket knives still in neat boxes near the perfume counter. He picked 4 of the largest and found also a wooden-handled, lead-tipped bludgeon, used evidently for cracking ice. Thus armed, he went out through the revolving door. He walked through streets that were like death under the climbing sun. Through streets and canyons of dead buildings upon which the new daylight had failed to shed life or diminish the terror of the night past. At Dearborn he found the door to the Tribune Public Service Building locked. He used the icebreaker to smash a glass door panel. The crash of glass on the cement was an explosion in the screaming silence. He went inside. Here the sense of desolation was complete, brought sharply to focus, probably by the pigeonholes filled with letters behind the want ad counter. Answers to 1,001 queries, waiting patiently for someone to come after them. Before going to the basement and the back files of the Chicago Tribune, Frank climbed to the second floor and found what he thought might be there: a row of teletype machines with a file board hooked to the side of each machine. Swiftly, he stripped the copy sheets off each board, made a bundle of them, and went back downstairs. He covered the block back to the hotel at a dog trot, filled with a sudden urge to get back to the 4th floor as soon as possible. He stopped in the drugstore and filled his pockets with soap, a razor, shaving cream, and face lotion. As an afterthought, he picked up a lavish cosmetic kit that retailed, according to the price tag, for $38 plus tax. He let himself back into the room and closed the door softly. Nora rolled over, exposing a shoulder and one breast. The breast held his gaze for a full minute. Then a feeling of guilt swept him, and he went into the bathroom and closed the door. Luckily, a supply tank on the roof still contained water, and Frank was able to shower and shave. Dressed again, he felt like a new man. But he regretted not hunting up a haberdashery shop and getting himself a clean shirt. Nora still had not awakened when he came out of the bathroom. He went to the bed and stood looking down at her for some time. Then he touched her shoulder. "Wake up, it's morning." Nora stirred. Her eyes opened, but Frank got the impression she did not really awaken for several seconds. Her eyes went to his face, to the window, back to his face.
"What time is it?"
"I don't know. I think it's around 8 o'clock. Nora stretched both arms luxuriously. As she sat up, her slip fell back into place, and Frank got the impression she hadn't even been aware of her partial nudity. She stared up at him, clarity dawning in her eyes.
"You're all cleaned up."
"I went downstairs and got some things."
"You went out alone?"
"Why not? We can't stay in here all day. We've got to hit the road and get out of here. We've overshot our luck already."
"But that man in the hall last night. You shouldn't have taken a chance."
"I didn't bump into him. I found the place where he fixed his hand, down in the drugstore." Frank went to the table and came back with the cosmetic set. He put it in Nora's lap. "I brought this up for you."
Surprise and true pleasure were mixed in her expression. "That was very nice. I think I'd better get dressed."
Frank turned toward the window where he had left the bundle of teletype clips. "I've got a little reading to do." As he sat down, he saw, from the corner of his eye, a flash of slim brown legs moving toward the bathroom. Just inside the door, Nora turned.
"Are Jim Wilson and Mina up yet?"
"I don't think so." Nora's eyes remained on him.
"I think you were very brave to go downstairs alone, but it was a foolish thing to do. You should have waited for Jim Wilson."
"You're right about it being foolish, but I had to go."
"Why?"
"Because I'm not brave at all. Maybe that was the reason." Nora left the bathroom door open about 6 inches, and Frank heard the sound of the shower. He sat with the papers in his hand, wondering about the water. When he had gone to the bathroom, the thought had never occurred to him. It was natural that it should. Now he wondered about it. Why was it still running? After a while he considered the possibility of the supply tank on the roof. Then he wondered about Nora. It was strange how he could think about her personally and impersonally at the same time. He remembered her words of the previous night. They made her, he shied from the term. What was the old cliché? A woman of easy virtue. What made a woman of that type, he wondered. Was it something inherent in their makeup? That partially opened door was symbolic somehow. He was sure that many wives closed the bathroom door upon their husbands, did it without thinking instinctively. He was sure Nora had left it partially open without thinking. Could a behavior pattern be traced from such an insignificant thing? He wondered about his own attitude toward Nora. He had drawn away from what she'd offered him during the night, and yet from no sense of disgust. There was certainly far more about Laura to attract than to repel. Morals, he realized dimly, were imposed, or at least functioned for the protection of society. With society gone, vanished overnight, did the moral code still hold? If and when they got back among masses of people, would his feelings toward Nora change? He thought not. He would marry her, he told himself firmly, as quick as he'd marry any other girl. He would not hold what she was against her. "I guess I'm just fundamentally unmoral myself," he thought, and began reading the news clips. End of Part 2 of Deadly City.
Thank you for listening to this chapter. If you'd like to keep following this story or discover more fascinating tales, be sure to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications. We look forward to sharing the next exciting chapter with you. Until next time.